The airport was alive with the kind of restless energy only a busy terminal could produce. Families clustered together near the check-in counters. Business travelers clutched briefcases as they hurried past, and the intercom above poured out endless reminders about boarding gates and carry-on restrictions. Amid the noise and chaos, she stood quietly in line, ticket in hand, heart full of a mixture of excitement and fatigue. This wasn't her first flight, but something about this journey felt different. She had promised herself that this trip would be smoother, more enjoyable, even memorable. Clutching her boarding pass, she looked at the glowing screen above the counter. Her ticket said economy, and she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to sit in first class, just once. She had never asked before. But tonight, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she felt bold enough to try. As she stepped forward, the polished smile of the gate agent greeted her. "Good evening, ma'am." "Boarding pass, please." She handed it over, her voice calm but hopeful. "I was wondering, are there any upgrades available tonight? To first class, perhaps?" The words hung in the air longer than she expected, a question both ordinary and heavy. The agent barely looked up. Her fingers clicked rapidly on the keyboard, eyes fixed on the monitor. After a few seconds, she responded flatly, "No upgrades available. You'll remain in economy." "Next passenger, please." The dismissal was quick, almost surgical, as though her request had been nothing more than background noise in an already busy evening. A flicker of embarrassment rushed across her face. She stepped aside, allowing the man behind her, a businessman in a tailored suit, to step forward. She watched as he asked the same question, his voice filled with casual confidence. This time, the gate agent's smile returned, and after a few keystrokes, he was handed a new boarding pass. "Enjoy your seat in first class, sir." The sting was sharp, though she tried not to show it. She reminded herself to breathe, to keep her expression calm. But deep inside, the rejection echoed louder than she wished. She made her way down the jet bridge, the cool air rushing past as she walked. At the door of the aircraft, 2 flight attendants stood poised and polished, greeting passengers with trained smiles. She returned the courtesy, stepping inside and immediately noticing the contrast between the 2 cabins. First class gleamed like another world. Spacious leather seats reclined into near beds, glasses of champagne rested on trays, and passengers leaned back with the comfort of royalty. She slowed slightly, gazing at the elegance, wondering if she had been foolish to ask at all. She pressed on, however, gripping her bag tightly, moving past the dividing curtain into the narrow rows of economy. Her seat was near the middle, squeezed between 2 strangers. A young man with headphones already pressed firmly into his ears occupied the window seat, and an older woman flipping through a magazine sat at the aisle. She offered them both a polite nod before sliding into her space. The seatbelt clicked across her lap, the fabric scratchy against her skin. The contrast between her cramped row and the gleaming luxury just a few steps away was undeniable. She couldn't help but imagine how different this flight could have been. More legroom, a soft blanket, a glass of wine instead of a plastic cup. She leaned her head against the window, reminding herself that disappointment was familiar territory. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the feeling of being unseen, overlooked, denied access to something better. She thought about her job, where her ideas often went unheard in meetings. She thought about friendships, where her voice sometimes faded into the background. Life seemed to have a way of reminding her of her place, good enough to participate, but not quite special enough to be chosen. As the boarding continued, she closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to shake off the weight of rejection. She told herself it didn't matter. After all, she was still flying, still moving toward her destination. This trip was supposed to mean something bigger, a chance to reset, to step away from the grind of everyday life. She wouldn't let one denied upgrade ruin it. Yet her mind wandered. She remembered being a child, pressing her face against the glass at airports, watching planes take off, and imagining what it must feel like to be inside. Back then, flying itself had seemed magical. Somewhere along the way, the magic had been replaced by routine, long lines, delays, and cramped seats. Tonight, she had hoped to recapture a little piece of wonder. Instead, she had been reminded of limitations. "Can I get you anything?" The older woman at the aisle asked, her tone kind. She had noticed her expression, the way she carried herself. "Oh no, thank you. I'm fine," she replied, forcing a small smile. The truth was, she wasn't fine. She wanted to be, but the disappointment was heavier than she expected. She wondered if it was silly to feel this way over a seat. Maybe it wasn't about the seat at all. Maybe it was about everything else the seat represented. The announcements crackled overhead, the captain's voice filling the cabin with instructions about safety, weather, and expected flight time. Passengers buckled in, stowed their devices, and prepared for takeoff. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, eyes drifting toward the curtain that separated first class from the rest. Behind that curtain, passengers stretched their legs, sipping champagne. She sat pressed between two strangers, trying not to let the small space feel suffocating. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she felt something stir. A quiet voice reminded her that stories never unfold the way we expect. That sometimes disappointment is only the beginning. She adjusted her seatbelt, straightened her back, and turned her gaze forward. The plane was about to lift into the sky, and though she couldn't see it yet, the journey ahead held more than she imagined. Little did she know, the denial at the gate was not the end of her story. It was only the first step toward something she would remember for the rest of her life. The hum of boarding still filled the cabin as passengers trickled in. Overhead bins slammed shut, voices rose and fell in quick bursts, and the air carried that familiar mix of excitement and impatience. She sat quietly in her cramped seat, pretending to be absorbed by the safety card tucked into the pocket in front of her. In truth, her mind was far away, still replaying the sting of being denied. The curtain to first class swayed gently every time someone passed through. Each glimpse of luxury tugged at her thoughts. She leaned her head against the window, willing herself to be invisible. Then a ripple of energy moved through the aisle. People shifted in their seats. Whispers darted from row to row. At first, she thought it was just the natural restlessness of boarding, but soon it became clear. Someone had entered who carried a presence impossible to ignore. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture perfectly upright, as though he had been carved from discipline itself. The uniform gave him away instantly. A Navy service jacket, adorned with subtle insignias that spoke of rank and experience. His walk was steady, his face calm, but his eyes carried something deeper, the gaze of a man who had seen more than most would ever imagine. Passengers noticed. Some straightened as he passed, others leaned toward the aisle to catch a better look. For a moment, the noisy cabin seemed to settle under the weight of his presence. She glanced up, almost reluctantly. Their eyes met briefly. Hers were tired, tinged with quiet disappointment. His were sharp, observant, but softened by something she hadn't expected: warmth. He slowed. To her surprise, instead of moving past, he paused at her row. The young man with headphones didn't notice, lost in his music. The older woman at the aisle looked up, startled but curious. The soldier's attention, however, was focused squarely on her. "Mind if I step in for a second?" His voice was low but carried authority, the kind of tone that wasn't used to being questioned. The woman at the aisle immediately shifted, allowing him space. He leaned slightly, close enough that she could hear him over the buzz of boarding announcements, but not so close that it felt intrusive. "You look like you could use a better view of this flight," he said, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. She blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Instead of answering directly, he tilted his head toward the front of the plane. "Have you ever seen the cockpit?" Her mouth parted slightly, confusion swirling with disbelief. Was he serious? Passengers weren't usually allowed near the cockpit, not anymore. Regulations were strict, rules tighter than ever. The very suggestion sounded impossible. No, I haven't," she admitted softly. "Then it's time you did?" he replied matter-of-factly, as though granting access to such a sacred space was as simple as offering a spare seat. Her first instinct was suspicion. Maybe he was joking, or maybe she was misunderstanding him. But the sincerity in his eyes silenced those doubts. Around them, passengers had begun to notice the exchange. A few leaned forward curiously, trying to catch every word. The older woman at the aisle smiled faintly, her expression somewhere between envy and admiration. "You should go," she whispered. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. She had resigned herself to invisibility, to sitting quietly in the shadows of first class. Yet here was this man, this soldier, offering her something even rarer than the seat she had been denied. "But I can't just," she began, nerves tightening her throat. "You can," he interrupted gently. His tone left little room for argument, not out of arrogance, but out of certainty. "Come with me." He extended his hand, palm open, steady. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers hovering in the space between refusal and trust. Then, almost instinctively, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, reassuring, the kind of hold that said, "I've led people through worse than this. You're safe with me." The young man by the window finally removed one headphone, confused as he glanced up. "What's going on?" he muttered, but she barely heard him. The aisle opened as he guided her forward. Other passengers watched intently, whispers following them like a trail. Who is he? What's happening? Why her? She felt every pair of eyes on her back, but instead of shrinking under the weight of attention, she walked taller. The sting of rejection at the gate seemed to dissolve with each step. When they reached the front, the flight attendants immediately recognized him. Their professional smiles shifted into genuine respect. One of them straightened, almost saluting out of habit before catching herself. "Evening, Captain," one attendant said warmly. "Are you heading back?" "Just passing through," he replied easily, his voice calm but commanding. "She's with me." The attendants exchanged quick glances, but didn't question further. With a nod, one pulled aside the reinforced cockpit door. For the first time in her life, she stepped across the threshold. Inside, the cockpit glowed with an otherworldly light. Dozens of dials, switches, and digital screens illuminated the space, painting the walls in hues of green and amber. It felt both overwhelming and intimate, like entering the heart of a living machine. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. All the cramped rows and crowded chatter behind her faded away. Here, silence and focus reigned. The soldier leaned close. "Not bad for a substitute upgrade, huh?" he murmured, the faintest trace of humor in his tone. She laughed, a sound she hadn't expected to escape her lips tonight. It was soft, nervous, but real. "No," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Not bad at all. For the first time that evening, she wasn't thinking about rejection. She wasn't thinking about missed opportunities or closed doors. She wasn't even thinking about the people staring behind her. She was standing in a place most passengers never imagined stepping into, not because she had paid for privilege, but because someone had seen her, chosen her, and invited her forward. And though she couldn't yet understand why, she knew this encounter would change everything. The cockpit door closed gently behind them. sealing her off from the restless buzz of passengers and the cramped hum of economy seating. The sudden quiet was startling, as though she had stepped into another world entirely. Here, the air felt different, heavier with responsibility, lighter with possibility. The glow from the instrument panels bathed the space in soft hues of green and amber, blinking lights pulsing like the heartbeat of the aircraft itself. She stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. I can't believe I'm standing here," she whispered. The SEAL pilot turned, watching her reaction with an expression that was both amused and knowing. "Most people never do," he said. "But then again, most people don't ask for first class either." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away quickly. "You saw that?" "I see more than you think," he replied, settling into the captain's seat with the ease of a man who belonged in command. "The way you held yourself. The way you smiled politely, even when you were brushed off. It reminded me of something." She tilted her head, curiosity pushing through her nerves. "Of what?" "Of soldiers I've known," he said simply. "The ones who keep steady faces, even when the world tells them they're not enough. The ones who don't complain, but who carry disappointment quietly. That kind of composure stays with me." His words stunned her into silence. She had never thought of herself as composed, not really. If anything, she felt the opposite most days, invisible, overshadowed, dismissed. And yet, here was a man who had flown missions under fire, seen the worst of humanity, and he was comparing her presence to those who endured it all with dignity. "I'm not a soldier," she said softly. "No," he agreed, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "But strength takes many forms. Sitting quietly in disappointment, still choosing kindness, still holding yourself with grace, that's a different kind of courage. Most people don't notice." "I did." Her chest tightened at his words, emotion pressing against her rib cage in a way she hadn't expected. She looked around the cockpit again, her gaze sweeping over the panels, the switches, the controls that looked impossibly complex. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's alive," he corrected. "Every button, every dial, every gauge here is part of a system that has to trust itself to work in harmony. Flying isn't about power. It's about discipline, about respect for the machine and the people inside it." She moved closer, almost unconsciously, drawn toward the co-pilot's chair. Her hand brushed the smooth leather, and she froze, not daring to sit without permission. He noticed, nodding toward the seat. "Go ahead." Her eyes widened. "I can't. This is—" "You can," he interrupted firmly, the same way he had in the aisle. "Tonight, this is your seat." With careful movements, she lowered herself into the chair. The cushions were firmer than she expected. The view out the windshield, unlike anything she had ever seen. The runway stretched endlessly ahead, bathed in light, a pathway into the unknown. From this angle, the cabin behind them didn't exist. It was just the two of them, the glowing instruments, and the open sky waiting beyond. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on her lap. "I feel like I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be." He leaned back, studying her. "That's the funny thing about life. Sometimes the places we think don't belong to us are the ones we're meant to see most. Comfort zones don't teach us much. But moments like this, they change you." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why me?" "Because you needed to be reminded," he said. His voice carried the steady certainty of a man who had faced storms and refused to flinch. "That rejection at the counter wasn't the end of your story tonight. It was just the opening act." She let his words sink in, staring out at the dark tarmac. A small laugh escaped her, half disbelieving. "You know, I thought my story tonight was going to be about how I couldn't even get an upgrade. I felt ridiculous for asking. I felt invisible." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze steady on hers. Invisible? Not to me. And not in this seat. You're here because you belong here. If not always in first class, then in places where dignity outweighs privilege. Her eyes stung unexpectedly, the burn of tears she hadn't meant to release. She blinked rapidly, embarrassed. I don't usually cry, she admitted, her voice wavering. Good, he said with a soft chuckle. Neither do I, but the truth is, most of us carry disappointments that pile up quietly. Sometimes all it takes is one reminder that someone sees us. The cockpit was silent for a long moment, save for the quiet hum of the aircraft systems. She sat still, letting the weight of his words anchor her, letting the view before her expand something in her heart she hadn't realized was shrinking. Finally, she broke the silence. This means more than you know. I know enough, he replied gently. They stayed like that for several minutes, her seated in awe, him watching with the calm assurance of someone who understood the gift he was giving. Outside, the bustle of the terminal carried on. Passengers argued over luggage space, attendants checked manifests, and no one beyond that reinforced door knew that a woman who had been denied first class was now sitting in the most sacred seat of all. When at last he rose, extending his hand again, she hesitated before taking it. Is it time to go back? She asked, her voice tinged with both gratitude and reluctance. For now, he answered. But remember this, once you've sat here, the world doesn't look the same again. Don't let anyone tell you you're invisible. You've already seen the view from the front. She stood, her legs unsteady, but her spirit soaring. As he guided her back toward the cabin, the whispers would surely return, the curious stares following her steps. But for the first time that evening, she didn't mind, because she carried something none of them could take away, the memory of being invited forward, chosen not by privilege, but by recognition. The cockpit seemed alive with a quiet intensity, each light blinking in a precise rhythm, each gauge telling a story she didn't fully understand. She leaned slightly forward, mesmerized, as if the aircraft itself had secrets she was only now being allowed to witness. The hum of electronics was comforting in its consistency, a heartbeat of control amidst the chaos of the world she had left behind in economy class. He gestured toward the co-pilot's seat once more, this time with a gentle insistence. Go ahead, sit, see it from the front. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered herself, the leather chair firm beneath her. The view out the windshield was breathtaking, stretching into the darkness of the tarmac, with the distant glow of runway lights like a river of stars. She pressed her palms lightly against the armrests, trying to steady herself, though her heart raced with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Everything you see here, he began, his voice calm, measured, is part of a system that has to trust itself completely. Flying isn't about power. It's about understanding, control, discipline, respect for both the machine and the people relying on it. She nodded, absorbing every word, though she had only a superficial understanding of the dials and switches before her. Yet the words weren't just technical. They carried meaning. They mirrored her own life. The discipline it took to face daily rejection, the respect required to navigate a world that often overlooked her. You know, he continued, his tone lighter now, most people never see this. They sit in comfort, enjoy their food, maybe glance at the clouds. But this is different. You're standing at the helm of something greater than yourself. You're seeing what most people never notice. She swallowed hard. The cramped, noisy rows of economy seemed miles away now, as though a different universe existed here, glowing with soft green and amber light. She traced her fingers over the smooth surface of a control panel, marveling at the design, the precision, the care. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice trembling. It is, he agreed, leaning back slightly. And it's demanding. It's not about luxury. It's about responsibility. Every button, every gauge, every system requires respect. You can't just press a switch and hope for the best. Flying requires mindfulness, awareness, presence, just like life, in many ways. She nodded slowly, letting his words settle into her mind. His explanation painted the cockpit not as a collection of instruments, but as a living entity, a testament to precision, courage, and diligence. Her heart swelled with gratitude and fascination. He smiled, noticing her absorption. "Go ahead, touch it," he said, indicating a row of switches. "Feel what it's like to interact with it. Don't worry, I've got you." Her fingers hovered over the panel, hesitant at first, then gently pressed a toggle switch. It clicked under her touch, a sound that resonated in the quiet space. She felt an unexpected thrill, like she had stepped into a world that had previously belonged to someone else entirely. "You see? That's control," he said softly. "Not just over the plane, but over yourself. Confidence comes from understanding, not fear. You're already doing it. You just didn't realize." She laughed softly, a sound of amazement. "I never imagined I'd get to do this. Not in my wildest dreams." "That's the thing," he replied. "Life rarely delivers what we imagine. Sometimes it gives us more, something we didn't even know we wanted or needed." For a moment, the hum of the aircraft seemed to sync with her heartbeat. She had spent years measuring herself against the expectations of others, always feeling slightly out of reach, always just short of being acknowledged. And now, here she was, seated in a cockpit, being guided by a man who had risked everything in service to others, who had seen worlds crumble and rebuild, and who saw value in her presence alone. Her gaze drifted across the array of buttons and dials, the glowing screens tracking altitude, speed, and trajectory. The complexity was mesmerizing, almost intimidating. Yet the pilot's calm presence beside her made it approachable, even inviting. She realized she wasn't just observing. She was participating, however subtly, in the orchestration of flight. "You're amazing at this," she said, finally daring to break the silence. "How do you do it? How do you keep track of everything without panicking?" He shrugged slightly, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Experience, yes. Training, definitely. But mostly, you learn to trust the process and trust yourself. Fear has its place, but it can't control you. You acknowledge it, but you don't let it dictate your actions." She considered his words carefully. It felt like a metaphor for her life. The rejections, the disappointments, the moments when she had felt unseen. Fear and doubt were constant companions, but perhaps they didn't need to rule her. Perhaps, like this cockpit, life required awareness, patience, and trust. He noticed her contemplative silence. "Want to see something fun?" he asked suddenly, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Fun? In a cockpit?" He chuckled softly. "Yes, everyone focuses on the serious side of flying, but there's a joy to it too. Watch this." With a deft motion, he engaged a series of switches, and the cockpit lights adjusted subtly, illuminating the array of instruments in a dazzling pattern. Buttons clicked, levers moved, and the gentle vibration of the plane beneath them created a symphony of precision. She leaned forward, fascinated. It was like watching a musician conduct a complex orchestra, each element in harmony, each note deliberate. "I've never seen anything like this," she breathed. "You're part of it now," he said. Even if only for a moment. Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to stay in this space forever, to remain in the cockpit, insulated from the cramped rows, the crowded aisles, and the world beyond the airplane door. She felt chosen, seen, recognized, feelings that had been rare in her life. He glanced at her thoughtfully. "You know," he said softly, First class isn't always what people think it is. Comfort is nice, sure, but the real privilege is being valued, respected, and included. That's something money can't buy. She nodded, her eyes glistening. He had understood what she hadn't even been able to articulate. The sting of rejection at the gate faded completely, replaced by something far more meaningful. "You've been denied tonight," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "But you've gained something greater. Perspective, understanding, insight. Maybe even a bit of courage." Her lips parted in a soft laugh, disbelief mixing with gratitude. "I can't believe this is happening. I feel alive," he smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Good. You should. That's the way it's supposed to feel." For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, her absorbing the glow of the instruments, the hum of the systems, the calm assurance radiating from the pilot beside her. She felt empowered, transformed, and strangely light. The cramped seats of economy, the closed gate, the world outside, they no longer mattered. As she finally rose to leave the cockpit, she realized she was carrying more than the memory of this unique moment. She carried confidence, clarity, and the understanding that recognition, respect, and dignity were sometimes worth far more than comfort or privilege. The SEAL pilot extended his hand once more. "Ready to go back?" he asked gently. She took it, feeling strength in the gesture, and nodded. "Yes, but I'll never forget this." "You won't," he assured her. "Neither will I." As she stepped back into the cabin, the soft hum of the engines following her, she realized something profound. Luxury, status, and first-class seats were fleeting. But experiences that recognized one's worth, that honored presence, were timeless. And tonight, she had just lived one of those moments. The cockpit had left her feeling unmoored in the best possible way. Stepping back into the cabin, she could still feel the faint vibration of the engines beneath her feet, the soft glow of the instruments lingering in her mind like an afterimage. The narrow rows of economy seemed smaller now, almost insignificant compared to the vast horizon she had glimpsed from the co-pilot's chair. Yet the real impact wasn't the view. It was the connection, the way someone had chosen to notice her, to include her in a space where most people would never belong. The pilot remained near the cockpit door, leaning casually against the frame. His presence was calm but commanding, like a lighthouse in the storm of the cabin's bustling passengers. He had returned, yet not gone, a quiet anchor in a world that otherwise felt loud and crowded. "I never thought anyone would actually let me do that," she admitted softly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I mean, I've imagined it 1,000 times, sitting in the cockpit, but I never thought it would happen." He smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. "Most people don't imagine beyond what's comfortable. You imagined, and you asked. That makes the difference." She shook her head slightly, still trying to absorb it all. "It's more than just sitting there. Seeing it, feeling it. I didn't realize I'd been holding so much tension until it lifted. That's the thing about moments like this," he said, his voice quiet and steady. "They give you perspective. You can go back to your world and see it differently, with confidence, clarity, and a little more courage than before." She glanced at him, curiosity shining through her eyes. "Have you always done this? Take people into the cockpit?" He chuckled softly. "Not usually. It's not standard procedure, of course. But sometimes, when you see someone who's quietly carrying more than they should, you give them a chance. You let them see what most people never do. That chance, it changes them?" She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to admit the truth. Then she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so much of my life feeling invisible, overlooked, passed by." He didn't interrupt. He didn't dismiss her. He just waited, letting the words settle between them. I've worked hard, tried to prove myself, but it feels like no one notices, she continued. And then tonight? Someone did. He nodded, slowly, as if confirming what she was saying. And that's enough sometimes, isn't it? To be seen, to be acknowledged. To know that what you carry, all the effort, the quiet strength, matters to someone? She swallowed hard, eyes stinging with emotion. It is enough, she admitted. More than enough, actually. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the plane's engines, the occasional murmur of passengers settling in for the flight. She could feel the weight of the world slipping off her shoulders, replaced by something lighter, hope, recognition, possibility. You know, he said after a pause, we all carry stories like yours. Some louder, some quieter. Some celebrated, some hidden. But every story is important. Every experience shapes who we are. She looked at him, surprised at the depth in his voice. Even the ones where people hurt us? Where we're overlooked or rejected? Especially those, he replied without hesitation. Those moments teach resilience. They teach patience. They teach the quiet courage of moving forward, even when it feels like the world isn't noticing. She nodded slowly, taking in his words. They resonated in a way she hadn't expected, bridging a gap she had felt between herself and the rest of the world. I've had moments like that, he continued, his gaze distant for a second. Not in the civilian world, of course, but in my line of work. You see things, go through situations, and the recognition of your effort isn't always public. Sometimes it's private, and sometimes it's internal. You learn to value small acknowledgments, a nod, a gesture, a quiet word. She smiled faintly. So you understand what it feels like to be overlooked? I do, he said. And that's why I invited you here. Not because you needed to see the cockpit, but because you deserve to be recognized. Sometimes the smallest act of acknowledgement can change the course of someone's day, or even their life. Her heart swelled. She had spent years accumulating tiny disappointments, brushing them off as ordinary. But here, in the middle of a plane, she realized that a single moment, a single invitation, could outweigh countless denials. You know, she said softly, almost shyly, it's funny. I always thought first class was the prize, the luxury, the comfort, but it doesn't feel like that anymore. Not really. This feels like first class. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And why's that? Because it's not about the seat, she explained. It's about being seen, being valued, being included. No amount of plush leather or champagne could give me this feeling. He nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. Comfort is temporary. Recognition, respect, and understanding, those last. She laughed softly, a warm sound that felt foreign in its ease. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad I was denied first class. Otherwise, I might never have sat here, talked with you, or felt this way. He smiled, a quiet, approving expression. Sometimes life's rejections are just redirections. They lead us to moments we never expected, and ones we need more than we realize. She leaned back slightly in the chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Her thoughts drifted over her life, the countless times she had been overlooked at work, the subtle dismissals from friends, the quiet moments of self-doubt. And yet, here she was, in the cockpit, being seen in a way that transcended all of that. I feel lighter, she admitted, opening her eyes. Like I can breathe again. That's good, he said. Hold on to that. Remember that feeling. Let it remind you that no matter what happens, you carry strength you don't always recognize. She nodded, her gaze drifting over the glowing panels, the intricate instruments, the view out the front window. Each detail held meaning now, not just as tools of flight, but as symbols of opportunity, perspective, and human connection. "And you," she said after a pause, a teasing lilt in her voice, "you must have incredible stories from all your missions. I can only imagine what it's like to see the world from your perspective." He chuckled softly. "Some stories are worth sharing. Some aren't, but I can tell you this. Most people don't understand the value of quiet strength. Not just mine, but everyone's. Everyone has battles. Everyone has moments when they feel unseen. And yet, life keeps moving, and we keep moving. That's the shared story, the courage to persist." Her chest tightened. She realized that this wasn't just about him teaching her about planes, or about giving her a rare experience. It was about perspective, about connection, about understanding that life's weight could be lighter when someone else acknowledged it. "I think," she said softly, "this is one of the first times in a long time that someone really sees me. And that matters," he agreed. "More than first class. More than privilege. More than anything tangible." She smiled, truly smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The small cabin, the hum of the engines, the rows of passengers behind them, none of it mattered anymore. She had shared a moment that transcended all of that. For the rest of the flight, they sat together in quiet camaraderie, exchanging small stories and insights, not just about planes, but about life, resilience, and the quiet courage that carried people through challenges. Every anecdote, every shared experience reinforced a profound truth. Being seen, being valued, and being heard were treasures far greater than any seat upgrade could provide. When the flight attendants began preparing for takeoff, she finally rose, feeling lighter, stronger, and more aware of her own quiet power. The cockpit was no longer a space of mystery. It was a testament to what recognition could achieve. And in that shared silence, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never feel quite the same again. Returning to her economy seat felt different this time. The narrow rows, the cramped spacing, and the low hum of passengers chatting no longer seemed confining. She settled into her seat with a new awareness, a heightened sense of calm. The small plastic tray and the standard issue seatbelt that had once seemed so restrictive now felt almost trivial compared to the horizon she had glimpsed from the cockpit. It was as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis, and she was finally seeing herself from a perspective she had long denied herself. She glanced around the cabin, noting the passengers chatting or scrolling through their phones, some dozing lightly, others staring absent-mindedly out the windows. The glow from the overhead lights was soft, almost comforting, but she found her attention wandering to the curtain that separated first class from economy. Beyond it lay the plush leather seats, the glasses of champagne, and the comfort she had once craved. And yet, for the first time, she realized she didn't envy it. She had been given something far greater, an experience that money couldn't buy and recognition that no seat could provide. Her thoughts drifted back to the SEAL pilot, to the warmth in his gaze, to the calm certainty with which he had guided her through the cockpit. She had expected a demonstration, a brief tour. Instead, she had received perspective, encouragement, and the rare acknowledgement of her own quiet strength. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. The sting of rejection from the gate faded with each passing moment. She no longer defined herself by what had been denied. Instead, she felt elevated, almost as though the experience had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. It was a shift subtle yet profound, like the world had not changed, but she had. Her hands rested in her lap as she reflected on the conversation she had shared with the pilot. He had spoken of courage, resilience, and perspective, lessons not about flying, but about living. The cockpit had been more than a physical space. It had been a crucible for reflection, a place where she could see her own worth, magnified against the backdrop of responsibility, skill, and trust. She realized that life often demanded patience and perseverance in quiet ways. Opportunities weren't always flashy or obvious. Sometimes they came disguised as denial, disappointment, or delay. She thought of all the moments in her life when she had been passed over for recognition, the times her contributions had gone unnoticed, the occasions she had been quietly dismissed. And she understood now that those experiences had prepared her, in subtle ways, to fully appreciate this moment. Around her, the cabin hummed with routine, but she felt a distinct separation from it. Others were absorbed in minor inconveniences, seat adjustments, and small talk. She was absorbed in perspective. The denial at the gate, the cramped seat, the moments of self-doubt, all of it had been meaningful, but only when juxtaposed with what she had just experienced. She now carried a mental benchmark, a personal standard of value that no exterior circumstance could diminish. The flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. Polite smiles painted on their faces as they performed the choreography of service. She observed them with a new understanding, noticing how much effort went into even the smallest tasks, and how often such efforts were unseen or underappreciated. It reminded her of herself, of her own quiet contributions, and how little recognition they had sometimes received. The cockpit experience had opened her eyes to the subtle beauty of competence, diligence, and care. She turned her gaze to the passengers around her, considering how many of them might be carrying invisible burdens, quiet frustrations, or private disappointments. She felt empathy in a way she hadn't before, a sense of shared humanity born from her own recent experiences. Seeing herself from the pilot's perspective had not only shifted her self-view, but also her view of the world. She understood now that recognition could transform not just individuals, but entire interactions, entire atmospheres. Her thoughts returned to the pilot's words about courage. He had explained that courage wasn't always about dramatic actions or visible heroics. It was often quiet, steady, and persistent. It was the ability to continue despite setbacks, to move forward despite doubt, and to maintain dignity in the face of dismissal. She considered her own life in that context, realizing that she had demonstrated courage countless times, quietly and without fanfare. The acknowledgement she had received in the cockpit validated those efforts in a way she had never experienced before. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not proud in a boastful sense, but proud in the deep, steady way that comes from understanding one's own resilience. She felt a warmth spreading in her chest, a subtle but persistent glow of confidence that had been missing for far too long. She straightened in her seat, relaxed her shoulders, and let herself breathe fully, deeply, and without hesitation. She also reflected on gratitude. Gratitude for the pilot, who had recognized her, who had taken the time to see her beyond the superficial constraints of privilege. Gratitude for the experience itself, for the perspective it had provided. Gratitude for the quiet courage that she had carried all along, which had allowed her to step into the cockpit with curiosity and humility. And gratitude, too, for life's unpredictability, which had orchestrated the denial at the gate into the opportunity that had transformed her evening. As the plane ascended and the runway lights became small dots in the distance, she looked out the window and felt a sense of liberation. The horizon stretched endlessly, reminding her that her life, too, was expansive, full of possibilities she had yet to imagine. She understood now that setbacks, rejections, and closed doors were not indicators of failure, but invitations to greater understanding, greater patience, and ultimately, greater perspective. Around her, the cabin settled into the rhythm of flight. Passengers read, napped, or stared out the windows at the darkened clouds below. She observed them with a gentle detachment, recognizing both the ordinariness and the profundity of everyday life. Each person carried a story, a journey, a set of experiences invisible to the world, and she felt a kinship with them, a shared human experience of striving, waiting, and occasionally being noticed. She also noticed how the small gestures of kindness she had received from the pilot, from the flight attendants, from the world that had allowed her to experience this, had a ripple effect. Recognition could transform perception. Perspective could transform experience. And in that transformation, she discovered the power of her own presence, her own worth, and her own ability to embrace life fully, even when circumstances seemed ordinary or limiting. Hours passed, though the minutes felt different. Time seemed elastic, stretching with the weight of reflection and compressing with the excitement of new understanding. She allowed herself to revisit the memory of the cockpit, the soft glow of instruments, the hum of electronics, and the pilot's calm, steady presence. Every detail contributed to her sense of empowerment and her recognition that life's richest experiences often came unexpectedly, in moments that required attentiveness and openness to possibility. By the time the flight attendants began preparing for landing, she felt transformed. Not in a dramatic, instantaneous way, but in a subtle, persistent shift of perception. She saw herself as someone capable, valued, and resilient. She saw the world as a place filled with unseen stories, hidden opportunities, and quiet acknowledgments that could change everything. And most importantly, she carried the understanding that perspective, once gained, could never be taken away. She adjusted her seatbelt and leaned back, a serene smile on her face. Outside, the clouds glowed faintly with the last hints of twilight, a mirror of the light she felt inside. She was no longer the same person who had slumped in disappointment at the gate. She had been lifted, not by privilege or circumstance, but by recognition, connection, and the profound insight that true value came not from status, but from awareness, courage, and the acknowledgement of one's worth. And as the plane descended toward its destination, she carried that lesson with her, ready to face the world anew, with perspective, gratitude, and the quiet strength of someone who had finally been seen. The plane hummed steadily as it leveled out at cruising altitude, a smooth rhythm that carried passengers gently through the night. She gazed out the window, watching the city lights shrink into a scattered constellation below. For most travelers, it was a familiar scene, routine, and unremarkable. But for her, the glow of the world beneath her reflected something far more profound. The transformation of perspective she had gained in the cockpit, a newfound awareness of her own value and potential. Returning to her economy seat, she no longer felt confined. The cramped row, once a source of frustration, seemed trivial now. Her mind was expansive, filled with the memory of the cockpit, the steady presence of the SEAL pilot, and the quiet acknowledgement she had received. The denial at the gate, the disappointment of being overlooked, had shifted from a sting into a catalyst. She realized that life's obstacles weren't always setbacks. They could be openings to unexpected experiences, lessons, and personal growth. She looked around the cabin with new empathy, noticing passengers hunched over their screens, lost in thought, or quietly dozing. Each carried their own burdens, their own unseen stories, their own moments of invisibility. She felt a subtle kinship with them, understanding the universality of striving, hoping, and waiting for acknowledgement. She had been there herself, countless times, and now she carried the reminder that a single act of recognition could ripple far beyond its immediate effect. Her thoughts wandered back to the pilot, to his calm demeanor, his measured words, and the way he had invited her into a space most would never see. She marveled at the ease with which he had acknowledged her, the way he had treated her presence as significant without fanfare or pretense. In that moment, she realized that confidence and validation were contagious. When someone else recognized your worth, it could ignite courage and clarity that had lain dormant. Pulling out a small notebook from her bag, she began to write. Not for anyone else, not for work or social media, but for herself. She documented the experience in vivid detail: the smell of the cockpit, the gentle hum of instruments, the glow of the displays, the reassurance in his voice, the way she felt seen for the first time in a long while. Writing allowed her to cement the memory, transforming it into a resource she could revisit whenever doubt crept in. She wrote about the lesson that first-class seats, luxury, and outward privilege were secondary to acknowledgement, respect, and perspective. The experience had shown her that value wasn't assigned externally. It was recognized, felt, and internalized. She scribbled notes about courage: the quiet courage of persistence, the steady courage of facing disappointment, and the deliberate courage of embracing opportunity when it appeared. Hours passed, though the world outside remained dark, dotted with distant lights and fleeting clouds. The quiet solitude of the flight became a companion, providing space to reflect on her past experiences with new insight. She thought about times she had held back, waiting for permission, seeking validation, or doubting her own abilities. She recognized that those moments had been formative, teaching patience, humility, and resilience. But she also understood that perspective had the power to transform those lessons from burdens into assets. A soft chime indicated the flight attendant's service, but she barely noticed. The mundane motions of handing out beverages and snacks felt insignificant compared to the internal shift she was experiencing. She observed a young mother soothing a restless child in the row ahead, and a businessman carefully reviewing documents in the aisle seat beside her. Each interaction, each ordinary moment, now appeared imbued with subtle meaning. Every person's experience carried depth, significance, and the potential for connection. Her reflection deepened further. The denial she had faced at the gate, once a source of embarrassment and frustration, now seemed like a necessary prelude. Without it, she might never have been invited into the cockpit. Without it, she might never have encountered the pilot who saw her for who she truly was. Life, she realized, often disguised opportunities as obstacles, requiring attentiveness and openness to recognize their potential. She closed her notebook and leaned back, feeling a quiet sense of empowerment. She was no longer defined by small denials, by overlooked contributions, or by the limitations others imposed on her. Instead, she carried the affirmation of someone who recognized her strength, the insight that perspective transforms experience, and the knowledge that her own quiet courage mattered. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers began to adjust, stretch, and move about. She noticed a young man struggling to retrieve his bag from the overhead bin, and without hesitation, she reached over to help him. A small act that felt natural rather than performative. The pilot's words echoed in her mind. Recognition, acknowledgement, and courage ripple outward, affecting not just ourselves, but the world around us. When the lights dimmed for the evening, she leaned against the window once more, letting the dark clouds and distant city lights soothe her. The transformation she had experienced wasn't a dramatic spectacle, but a quiet, lasting shift in awareness. She felt stronger, calmer, and more attuned to the significance of human connection, recognition, and perspective. She considered her life beyond the flight, the workplace meetings, the social interactions, the personal ambitions she had quietly nurtured. She understood now that she could navigate these spaces differently. She could assert herself with calm confidence, trust her judgment, and recognize her own value without seeking constant external validation. The cockpit experience had given her a model, a moment where acknowledgement and perspective intersected, transforming ordinary circumstances into profound lessons. A soft voice from the pilot's seat drifted back through the cabin. "You're doing well," he said, almost casually, though she recognized the depth in his words. It was the kind of reassurance that affirmed not just presence, but potential. She smiled, appreciating the quiet encouragement that carried forward even across the space separating them. As the flight continued, she felt a new rhythm in her mind. She would approach challenges differently, observe opportunities more carefully, and value the moments of recognition that came her way. She understood that setbacks, denials, and rejections were not final judgments, but invitations to new perspectives, waiting for the attentiveness and courage to seize them. She imagined the pilot watching the aircraft controls, steady and composed, guiding the journey with calm precision. And she realized that his actions had modeled something beyond flying, the power of seeing others, acknowledging strength, and offering moments that could change the trajectory of a life. She resolved to carry that lesson forward, to create her own moments of recognition for those around her, and to trust in her own courage when opportunities appeared. By the time the first signs of dawn painted the horizon in muted gold and amber, she felt transformed. The flight had become more than transportation. It had been a journey of perspective, insight, and self-recognition. She understood now that life's true elevation wasn't measured in altitude or luxury, but in awareness, courage, and the quiet acknowledgement of worth. And as the plane began its descent, she felt ready. Ready to step into the world with a renewed sense of purpose, to embrace challenges with confidence, and to navigate life with the understanding that true recognition, once received, cannot be taken away. For the first time in a long while, she felt fully prepared to move forward, carrying perspective, gratitude, and the courage to see both herself and the world in a brighter, more meaningful light. The plane began its descent, the steady hum of the engines shifting subtly as the aircraft aligned with the runway lights below. She felt a gentle thrill in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and calm resolve. The world outside was waking gradually, the first hints of dawn rushing the horizon with soft shades of gold and rose. She pressed her hands lightly against the window, tracing the faint shimmer of city lights below, each one a reminder that life was vast, filled with opportunities both seen and unseen. She leaned back in her seat, allowing herself a quiet reflection. The flight had been more than a physical journey. It had been an emotional and spiritual passage. From the sting of being denied first class at the gate to the breathtaking, transformative moments in the cockpit, she had experienced a rare gift, perspective. She had learned that acknowledgement, recognition, and quiet courage could carry more weight than privilege, luxury, or status. The memory of the SEAL pilot's calm presence resonated in her mind. He had not only guided her through the cockpit's complex machinery, but had also navigated her through her own self-doubt. His words about courage, perspective, and being seen echoed in her thoughts. Recognition, respect, and understanding last longer than comfort. Life's rejections are invitations to greater awareness. She smiled softly, realizing how deeply those words had settled into her consciousness. Passengers around her were adjusting to the descent, some pressing call buttons, others rearranging bags or checking phones. She observed them with a sense of detachment, yet also connection. Each carried stories, burdens, hopes, and quiet struggles. She recognized herself in them, and she understood the universal value of being noticed, acknowledged, and understood. The cockpit had taught her that recognition was not merely a luxury, but a transformative force. As the plane touched down, smoothly, the wheels kissing the runway with a gentle thrum, she felt a grounding shift. The journey from denial to perspective had not been swift, but it had been profound. She thought of her life ahead, the work she had left unfinished, the personal goals she had postponed, the relationships she had neglected. Everything now appeared through a lens of possibility rather than limitation. She realized that she carried a newfound resilience and clarity, gifts she had received not from luxury, but from recognition and connection. The cabin lights brightened as the aircraft taxied toward the gate. She could hear the murmurs of passengers preparing to disembark, the shuffling of luggage, and the faint squeak of wheels against the tarmac. Yet she remained immersed in her reflection, savoring the quiet sense of empowerment that had taken root within her. She understood that true first-class moments were not about physical seats or champagne flutes, but about experiences that uplifted, illuminated, and validated one's presence. When the plane finally came to a stop, the pilot's voice filled the cabin over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your destination. We hope you have a wonderful day ahead." Her heart lifted at the familiar tones of authority and competence, now infused with a deeper understanding of leadership and guidance. She remembered the man behind those words, the one who had seen her beyond superficial measures, and she felt gratitude swell within her. The acknowledgement she had received would carry her far beyond this single flight. As passengers began to gather their belongings, she took a moment to stand, stretching and breathing deeply. She felt lighter, steadier, and more prepared to face whatever awaited outside the aircraft door. Her reflection in the small window by the cabin door showed a woman transformed, not by material privilege, but by perspective, courage, and recognition. She reached the jet bridge and stepped onto solid ground, the cool morning air brushing against her cheeks. The airport buzzed with activity. Travelers hurrying to connections, families reunited, business people checking schedules. Yet she moved through it all with a quiet confidence, her posture straighter, her steps more assured. She carried the cockpit with her, not physically, but emotionally and mentally. The hum of the instruments, the glow of the panels, the pilot's calm reassurance, all embedded within her awareness. Walking through the terminal, she noticed small acts of kindness and patience. A young woman helping a child with a stroller, a man holding the door for an elderly traveler, a flight attendant offering directions with a smile. Each act resonated with her newly acquired understanding. Small gestures of recognition, acknowledgement, and empathy could ripple outward and create meaningful impact. She felt inspired to carry that forward, to be the agent of subtle transformation in her own life and the lives of others. Her thoughts returned to the pilot, the SEAL who had transformed her evening. She wondered if he knew the full impact of his actions. Perhaps he had acted out of simple decency, out of recognition of quiet strength. Yet she understood that the lessons he imparted about courage, perspective, and acknowledgement would stay with her indefinitely. She realized that the greatest impact we have on others often comes from small, intentional moments of seeing, guiding, and validating. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues, mundane communications that now seemed trivial compared to the emotional depth she had experienced. She smiled at the irony. The world outside the plane continued as usual, unaware of the transformation that had occurred inside one passenger's heart. She resolved to integrate the lessons into her daily life, to recognize others, to act with patience, to seek perspective, and to value her own quiet courage. As she exited the terminal and stepped into the sunlight, the city seemed different. Buildings, streets, and passers-by appeared imbued with subtle significance. Every face carried a story. Every interaction held the potential for recognition or kindness. Every moment offered the opportunity to act with awareness and courage. She carried the cockpit experience with her like a beacon, illuminating the ordinary with meaning and possibility. She paused briefly, looking up at the sky, now tinged with the soft light of morning. The horizon stretched endlessly, reminding her of the vastness of life's opportunities. She understood that setbacks, denials, and disappointments were not endpoints, but invitations to perspective, courage, and growth. And she felt ready to navigate her own journey, with a confidence born not from privilege, but from insight, recognition, and a profound understanding of her own worth. As she walked toward the city beyond the airport, she felt a sense of continuity, a reassurance that the lessons of the flight would extend far beyond its duration. Life would inevitably present challenges, rejections, and moments of invisibility, but she now possessed the tools to navigate them. Awareness, empathy, courage, and the knowledge that being seen and valued could transform not just the moment, but the trajectory of one's life. And as the airport faded behind her, replaced by the possibilities of the day ahead, she carried within her a lasting truth. The greatest journeys are not measured by distance traveled, seats occupied, or luxury attained, but by perspective gained, courage nurtured, and the profound recognition that life's true elevation comes from being seen, acknowledged, and empowered to move forward.